This thought that I'm going to try to present is something that I've been working on for 19 years. 19 years I've been working, not consistently, but it's been something that's been on my mind for 19 years. It started when I learned Sanhedrin 19 years ago, and hopefully I'll be able to present it in a way that everybody's going to get it. So, starting with Parshas Mishpatim. Mishpatim has a lot of laws. Thank you. Mishpatim's got a lot of Mishpatim in it. Has a big chunk of all the Mishpatim, all the rules, all the mitzvahs that we have in the Torah. They show up over here in Parshas Mishpatim. First pasuk. Make ish v'meis mois yuma. Somebody help me out here. Make ish.
If you hit a person, you put to death.
Make ish. If you hit a person, v'meis, and he dies, mois yumas, you surely will be put to death. Okay? You hit a person and he dies, you will surely be put to death. That is in Parshas Mishpatim, Paraklaf Aleph, Pasuk Yud Beis. Let's continue on with the next two psukim. V'chi yerivun, and when it will be that there will be an argument, anashim of men arguing. V'hika ish, and a man will hit es re'eu, his friend, be'even, with a stone, oy be'egraif, or with a fist. Good. V'lo yamus, and he will not die. V'nofal lemishkav, and he falls to the bed. He gets bedridden, he gets sick. Im yakum, continuing with the next pasuk. Im, if yakum, he gets up. V'yisalech bachutz, and he goes outside. Al mishantoi, and we're going to define the word mishantoi, but right now we're going to define it on his leaning, and we'll talk about what is he leaning on. V'nika hamake, the hitter, the aggressor, will become clean. Rak shivta yite, and he must pay for wages that are lost. V'rapa yirape, and he must pay for medical bills. That's the second pasuk. So the first pasuk talks about if you murder somebody straight out. And the second pasuk seems to be talking about that you hit somebody, you injure him, he does not die, he gets sick. Eventually he goes outside and he's able to walk around on his leaning. You have to pay the medical bills, you have to pay the lost wages. Question, go ahead. Well, I have it broken up. You see, it says Yud Ches, so that's Pasuk Yud Ches. And then continuing on in the middle of the line, towards the end of the line, it says Yud Tes, that's the following Pasuk. Okay.
What's this pasuk trying to say?
That's exactly what we want to jump in. Great question. So what the Pasuk literally says, first Pasuk says if you murder somebody, you get put to death. Second Pasuk says that, well, it seems to say that if you injure somebody, and the person is injured for a while, he's bedridden, but he ends up being able to get up and go outside on his own leaning, or we'll talk about what leaning means. So then the person that hit him is free, but he still has to pay. He has to pay some sort of damages. Lost wages, he has to pay medical bills. But what is this pasuk trying to say? There's a machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, and it centers around these words of the pasuk, "V'lo yamus," and he will not die. The Gemara points out that these two words, "V'lo yamus," and he does not die, seem to be extra. If you would remove those two words from the pasuk, it seems to be that we'd still get the entire idea of the pasuk. Somebody hits somebody, and he falls to the bed, he becomes bedridden, he's sick. If eventually he recovers, so you're not guilty of murder because he recovered, but you have to pay. So these words, "V'lo yamus," and he doesn't die, don't seem to be needed. You could just say you hit somebody, he gets sick. If he recovers, I'm okay, but I still have to pay. No punishment, but I have to reimburse, I have to pay. Why do these words, "V'lo yamus," show up in the pasuk? They don't seem to be needed.
But obviously he didn't die.
Obviously he didn't die. He got sick, And then the very next pasuk says, and if he gets up and he's able to walk around outside, so then just pay for it and everybody's okay. So what do you need these words v'lo yamus? It's clear from the pasuk that the fella did not die. It says v'nafal mishkav, he got sick. What's the end of the story? Did he remain sick and die eventually? No. The next pasuk says, well, if he gets up and he goes outside, so the aggressor is clean, he's off the hook, he just has to pay. So what are these words v'lo yamus? There's an opinion of Rashi. Let's start with it. Deloi tema, do not say, Hoyel v'yotza mi Beis Din chayav. Since this person left Beis Din, he left court chayav, obligated. What does that mean? Guilty. What was he guilty of? What did he leave Beis Din of? So over here, I figured if Rabbi Kushner would be here, he'd perk up. This is the coroner. Or not necessarily the coroner, but the medical examiner. If somebody hits somebody, if somebody taps somebody on the back, and the person falls down and he dies, is the tapper a murderer?
If you, yes. According to Gemara, yeah. Because according to Gemara, if you throw your thing and hits on the tree and...
Let me rephrase the question. If I walk over to, I don't want to do this to anybody because it might be a liability. If I walk over to this stender, which is a person, the stender is now a person, and I go like this to the stender and it crumbles and dies. Now again, the stender is a person today, right? Am I a murderer? Do I get capital punishment? Do I fall under that first pasuk that we read? Mais yumas. Okay, so you're saying it wasn't done intentional. Okay, fine, fair enough. Am I a murderer? So the answer is, and this is what the pasuk might be coming to teach us. The answer is that Beis Din always has to assess. They have a medical team, and they have to assess, well, really two parts. The aggressor and the aggressee. The person that was fighting, and the victim. So they have to assess what you did. Was that a action that would likely result in murder? And a lot of that depends on, well, how much force did you put? What type of weapon did you use? And also it would depend on the victim as well, right? If you have a tiny little baby and you drop them, that could be fatal, right? If you have a well-built teenage person and you drop them, they might just crack a bone. It's most likely not going to be fatal. So it's important by every case of murder or damages that Beis Din has a medical examiner team and they examine. And that we're pretty familiar with that. That's what happens nowadays too, right? If somebody would go ahead and tap somebody on the back and the guy would fall down and die, there would be an investigation and they would say, well, hey, what he did was not a murderous, did not have murderous force to it. This person, something else happened, and they don't necessarily connect the dots between my action of tapping somebody on the back and this person falling down and dying. Hold 1 second. So, in this pasuk, we're talking about a case that it was assessed, and the medical examiner concluded that there should have been a death over here. So it goes like this. V'lo yamus, he does not die, contrary to the assessment that he should have died. This fist was delivered with enough of a punch. This rock was thrown with enough force at this person that the impact of this rock, where it hit, this fist, where it hit, on this person, should have resulted in a fatality.
It is a crime in America, attempted murder.
Attempted murder, right? Attempted murder. This should have resulted in a fatality. It should have been the first pasuk of Makeh Ish V'Meis, that you hit somebody and he dies, so it's capital punishment. Comes along this next parsha and says this should have resulted in a fatality. It was assessed to result in a fatality, but what happened? It didn't. It didn't. He survived. He got sick. He became bedridden. But it did not result in a fatality.
You saying that the second pasuk is referring to a situation where he should have died?
He should have died. it should have resulted in a fatality, and that's v'lo yamus. He didn't die. He didn't die, meaning he should have died. It made sense that he would have died. That punch on this person and that spot should have resulted in a fatality. V'lo yamus, but it did not. Instead, he became bedridden. Excellent. I love it.
Instead, he just had a broken arm.
Fractured.
It keeps going.
He did a spin. Check spinning out of the way.
Let's keep on going over here. So, says Rashi, this is the second piece on the page, or the second part. Deloy tema, do not say, Hayol v'yotza mi Beis Din chayav. This person left Beis Din chayav. Beis Din assessed, the medical team assessed, that this person is a murderer. This person is a murderer. And since he left Beis Din chayav, he came out of Beis Din that it's been determined that you are a murderer because you hit the person in a way that he will die. Nikatle, we should kill him anyway, even if the fellow does not die. Deloy tema, what? Absolutely, Beis Din has to assess every case. Deloy tema, don't say Hoyel v'yotza mi Beis Din chayev nikatle. Don't say that if he left Beis Din chayev, because he is a murderer, he did a murderous action, it was assessed that it should have resulted in a murder, we should kill him anyway. And the hadar chaye, I get it, give me a second, Taisus is going to argue, and that which the person continued to live, and he ended up living, chos rachmana aleh, the Torah or the Hashem had mercy on him, really this guy's a murderer, and this fellow that continues to live and is able to recover and walk outside, Hashem had mercy on him, created a miracle. Lahachi asa, that's what the word v'lo yamus comes to tell me. And he did not die, koloimar, meaning to say, v'hika ish, a person hit another man, v'lo yamus, and the man did not die, kimasha amduhu, like we assessed him to die, ella, rather, nafa lemishkov, he became bedridden, became sick. Shifta yitain mamain v'loy misa, you pay money and not misa. Says Rashi, and this is going to be a little hard to swallow. Says Rashi.
There's a guy next to him with the same knife that did the same thing the same second.
That would be the mashal to try to illustrate why it shouldn't be such a bad thing. Says Rashi that the Torah's words v'lo yamus are teaching me that I could have thought that since this person did a murderous thing, you stabbed him, you hit him with a fist in a murderous way, and he became bedridden, and 3 days later, instead of dying like we expected him to die, he didn't die, he recovered. So I might have thought, well, that's miraculous. Hashem had mercy on him for some great reason. But really, we should kill the perpetrator. We should kill the bad guy. We should kill the murderer anyway. And Rabbi Nisman just gave a mashal. Let's say there's two people standing there. One guy does the exact same action as the other guy. This guy ended up killing him, and this guy didn't end up killing him. For whatever reason. It was assessed that both actions should have the exact same result, and it didn't. You may have thought that you kill him anyway. You're a murderer. The guy didn't die. You're a murderer anyway. I would have thought to kill him anyway, says Rashi. The words v'lo yamus teach me that if he doesn't die, we cannot kill him. Question.
Let's say there's like three people beating this person.
Can't hear you.
Let's say there's three people.
That's a good question. Let's not get into that. There's a Gemara that talks about what happens if there's multiple people hitting somebody and he ends up dying between all those beatings. It's not relevant to our discussion. It's a good question. Question. Go ahead.
Let's say this person beats someone up and he's critically injured, and then he dies due to medical complications.
That's a good question. That we're going to try to address a little later. Yeah.
What did I couldn't hear.
You hurt somebody, you beat him up, he gets sick. Did they assess him for death or not?
I don't know. Maybe
Was he assessed for death? That's the first most important thing. What? If he was not assessed for death and he ends up dying from medical complications or something else, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not on the hook. I would pay.
You're the hit, even though it was kind of medical fault, you're the person that led him to do that. He wouldn't have been in that situation.
If he was not assessed for death, so then I didn't do a murderous action. I don't get put to death. I don't get capital punishment for that. Maybe there's other things, but if he was assessed for death, and this is what I thought he was asking, if he was assessed for death, he becomes bedridden for a week, and he never recovers, and then there's medical complications, that might be different. That might be different. But if he, well, yeah, yeah. Taisus finds Rashi unbearable. Taisus cannot agree with Rashi. Let's read the next line. Taisus. Says Taisus, Asa kral ashmein, these words v'lo yamus are coming to teach us. Says Taisus, these words v'lo yamus are coming to teach us. The mishalem ripui v'sheves, you have to pay for lost wages, and you have to pay medical bills. Oh, that's true. That's good. Why are we not mentioning all five? Why does the Torah only mention these two? That's a good question. That's a good question. V'yafal gav, even though the dine mamenes machzirin bein l'zchus bein l'chayva, says Taisus, why do I need extra words in the Torah to tell me that you have to pay damages? Even though we know that by monetary issues, if something new comes to light, we'll still take it into account. That, let's say we thought a guy was exempt, he was patur, and then something new comes to light and turns out he's really chayiv to pay. Beis Din has no problem bringing back in the court case and rejudging it. So why do we need a pasuk to tell me that, well, if the guy doesn't die, you have to pay? We thought he was going to die. He didn't end up dying, so now you have to pay. Well, that's obvious you would have to pay. So says Taisus, and this touches on the sugya that I know at least Rabbi Parmet's holding in with his shir, the salka daitach, I would have thought, kivan dam du'alamisa, since he was assessed, the medical examiner determined that he should have died, patur, I don't have to pay. Because we know, that when you get a big punishment, and you have a small punishment looming, you get the big punishment and the small punishment falls away or it's somehow incorporated in the big one. We know there's a klal called ein loike umeshalom. You don't get malchus and you don't get hit. So there's also a klal that you don't get put to death and have to pay as well. So I would have thought that since this person technically was deemed guilty of murder, so he's off the hook, even though he doesn't end up getting murdered because the victim doesn't end up dying, but I would have thought that maybe you don't have to pay. So says Taisus, what's the point of these words, v'lo yamus? Not to tell me that we don't kill the perpetrator. Taisus says the purpose of v'lo yamus is to tell me that he still has to pay. Even though he was deemed guilty of murder, and of course we're not going to kill him because the guy's still alive. But you may have thought, well, he doesn't have to pay because he was deemed guilty of murder. Even though he's not going to be put to death, he's not going to be executed, he's not going to get the punishment for murder, but that would exempt him from payment. Says Taisus, v'lo yamus tells me that he still has to pay. So right now, to sum up where we're up to, we have a machlokes Rashi and Taisus. Rashi says the words v'lo yamus teach me that we don't kill him. We don't kill the perpetrator. I would have thought even though this person is in bed, or even though this person is out of bed already, he's walking around outside on his leaning, I would have thought that I kill him because this person performed a murderous act. Says Rashi, v'lo yamus teaches me we do not kill him. Says Taisus, no. I know that I would not kill him. I do not need a pasuk to tell me that if the victim is still alive, that we don't kill the perpetrator. We don't kill the criminal. I don't need a pasuk for that. If the victim is alive, I know very, very easily, it's a simple thing that you certainly would not kill the perpetrator. You would not kill the criminal. The guy's still alive, makes no sense. I would have thought maybe the criminal shouldn't have to pay. He shouldn't have to pay for the wages. He shouldn't have to pay for the medical bills. I would have thought that. Comes along the words v'lo yamus and teaches me, no, he must still pay. What?
Wait, so,
Huh?
This is how the meeting is very because
wait, who says that, Rashi?
Yeah. No, so again, Rashi says v'lo yamus teaches me we don't kill him.
And he still has to pay.
Taisa says v'lo yamus teaches me that he still has to pay. Meaning, according to Rashi, I would have thought we do kill the criminal, even though the guy's still alive. According to Taisus, I would have never thought that. The words v'lo yamus teach me that I have to pay because I would have thought I don't have to pay. So according to Rashi, I would have thought we kill the criminal. According to Taisus, I would have thought the criminal does not have to pay. Comes along V'leyamus, according to Rashi, we do not kill the criminal. Comes along V'leyamus, according to Taisus, and teaches me, you still have to pay. That is Machlokes Rashi and Taisus, how to understand this.
Aren't they saying the same thing?
No, not at all.
Well, Rashi said you don't pay, right? Rashi's saying
No, you certainly have to pay according to Rashi. It's clear from the Torah you do pay. The question is, what is V'lo Yamus teaching me? So Taisus says that without V'lo Yamus, I would have thought
that he doesn't have to pay.
that in a case where you actually did a murderous act, where you exerted force that should have resulted in murder, I would have thought you don't have to pay.
Okay, so what is the point of convicting the guy of murder if he's not even going to get killed? If he's not going to get anything for murder, what is the point?
Well, that's a good question. If a person gets hit, and now he's bedridden, he's in the hospital, he's in a coma,
Okay.
we assess whether what happened was something that should have resulted in murder. If the guy ends up dying, so then the person that hit him is a murderer. The guy ends up dying a week later, the person that hit him is a murderer.
He's a murderer anyways, not according to Rashi. That's a year.
Well, he's a murderer anyway, according to
A
Rashi.
year later.
What? Hang on. You go ahead.
Why is that any different? It doesn't matter when he dies. As
What?
long as he dies.
You don't have to die immediately. I think everybody understands that in any civilized society, you don't have to drop that on the spot. If you die a week later, you're also guilty of murder.
And they only die a year later. Am I the one who murdered him or not?
The person that assassinated Abraham Lincoln did not die on the spot. He died a day or two later in the...
Kids in that notebook in that
Several
room
years
was
is
in the
big.
hospital for 2 days.
Yeah.
Several years is a big factor.
Okay, hang on. Let's continue on. The next Machlokes Rashi, but not with Taisus, rather this is from the Chumash because I just can't get away from Rambans. I love the Rambans, so there's a Ramban and Chumash. Let's go back and read the pasuk. It says, "Im yakum v'yishalech bachutz." If he gets up and he walks outside, al mishantoi on his leaning.
Which, are we doing the Rashi or Rambam?
Well, we're going to start with the Rashi. Al mishantoi. I'm just reading the pasuk. Al mishantoi on his leaning. What would you think that means on his leaning? Mishantoi. On his leaning.
On his, like, his own support.
On his who? On his own support. That's Rashi. That's Rashi. You know what? Maybe we won't even read it inside. That is what Rashi says. Rashi says, Al buryoi v'koichoi, on his own health, on his own strength. He could go out on his own leaning. He does not need 3 people to pick him up to get out of his seat because Kaddish is coming. Okay?
It's not murder if you get up by yourself.
So at that point, if he's able to get up and walk around on his own accord without any assistance, without the tennis ball walker, without a cane, without any assistance, he is healthy enough that he's out of bed and walking around on his own accord. And then let's say something happens after that and somehow he takes a turn for the bad and he ends up dying, the criminal's off the hook. We see no connection anymore. My murderous action, which was a murderous action, but it ended. That murderous action ended. This guy is up. He's walking around. He's walking around without a cane. He's walking. The murderous action is over. Then I'm off the hook. That's what Rashi understands. Now, to point out to what Ozzy was saying, just the next piece of Rashi in that little piece, I'm not going to read it inside, but Rashi says is that in the meantime, though, we put the person in prison. We hold on to him. We hold on to the person in prison, meaning you are a murderer. Hang on, you are a murderer. This guy is lying in the hospital. This guy's lying in bed. He cannot get up. He can't walk around on his own strength. You are going to be kept locked up. The criminal will be kept locked up until he's able to get up and go around on his own strength, because we consider him a murderer. Hang on, what? We'll talk about that in a second. But and it's very interesting. A lot of times people ask is, there are cases in Chazal, you don't see it too much in the Torah, or let's say somebody does something absolutely heinous, a heinous crime, right? But for whatever reason, Beis Din can't take him to, they can't punish him, they can't give him the Torah recommended punishment. So there are plenty of cases in Chazal where we lock a person up and we do things. Over here, I think this is the only instance we have that Midday Raisa, Beis Din has a requirement to lock somebody up. This is, I think, the only case in the Torah where there is a midairaisa from the Torah. The midrabanan, they might do it all the time. They have to keep society at bay. But midairaisa, this is the only time I know of that there is a obligation for Beis Din to lock somebody up. So again, if the person is able to walk around outside on his own strength, so the criminal is released. Until then, the criminal is kept in lockup, incarcerated. I want to get to that question, but let's first see the Ramban and we'll go back. Ramban argues, if anybody would argue on Muki and say Mishantai does not mean on his own strength, on his leaning does not mean his own strength, what would you say it means? On his leaning. He's walking with a walker. He's going with one of those tennis ball things, right? He's going with a cane. Not only that, the Ramban quotes a beautiful pasuk in Zechariah. It says, Ish mishantoi biyadei. Anybody here ever heard of Mordechai ben David? Yeah? You have? Okay, great, yeah. He's a wonderful, wonderful singer, and he has a beautiful song. He takes this pasuk in Zechariah. I'm not going to, I might now. He takes this beautiful pasuk in Zechariah, and he makes a beautiful song out of it, and it's part of the nevuah that eventually in Yerushalayim there's going to be old people walking around. Old people walk around, there's a big, big bracha. If you speak to your grandparents, most of them did not have parents. I know my father always told me that he was lucky growing up. He had a bubby. Most of his friends did not have bubbies. Why? Because they were killed out in the war. My father was a lucky man. He had one bubby, right? So it's a beautiful bracha that eventually there'll be old people walking in Yerushalayim and they're going to be walking around with their canes. It's beautiful. People are going to live to a ripe old age. Yerushalayim's going to be full of old people. It's going to be full of young people playing. And it's a beautiful nevuah about what eventually Yerushalayim's going to look like. So Ramban says, well, that pasuk says, Ish mishantoi biyadai. Each man is going to have their mishantoi, their leaning, or their cane, their walker, in their hand. So Ramban understands this pasuk to mean, Im yakum v'yisalich bachutz, if he gets up and he walks around outside on his leaning, what does that mean? He gets up and walks around on his cane. So according to the Ramban, al mishantoi means he's walking around with a cane. He is not fully recovered. According to Rashi, this pasuk means al mishantoi, he is fully recovered. According to the Ramban, we are going to let the criminal free. We are going to clean the criminal from any guilt. Well, no, pay he's going to have to pay. He's going to have to pay. Meaning, if he goes around outside with a cane, he's not fully recovered, but he's going around outside with a cane, so now the criminal is free. He is no longer guilty. He is no longer being held for murder. So Machlokes Rashi and Ramban. Hang on. Yeah. Oh, no, that was... let's do it one more time. You nailed it. Say it louder so everybody could hear. Guys, if you want to hear what we just did, say it louder so everybody could hear it.
Rashi says if he has to walk completely on his own, then the criminal goes free. If Ramban says if he can walk with help, the criminal goes free.
That's right. So we have two machlokes here, Rashi, Ramban, which is the most recent one we discussed, and the previous one is Rashi and Taisus. Just to sum it up, we're going to read one more pasuk, and I'm going to give you a thought. I'm going to have to get going soon. The words "v'lo yamus," he will not die, according to Rashi, teach me. I would have thought I kill him even though the victim does not die, because the criminal did something murderous. Taisa says, I would have never thought that. I would have never thought that I will kill a criminal if his victim is still breathing. Machlokes, Rashi and Taisus. Rashi seems to say that without two words in the Torah, two extra words that are coming to teach me a special lesson, I could have killed a criminal for performing a murderous act even though the result was not death. Taisus disagrees. What Taisus actually does with the pasuk is not relevant. We spoke about it, that you have to pay. I would have thought you don't pay. But Taisus disagrees and says, I would have never thought that. I would have never thought that I could kill a criminal. I could hold a criminal accountable for death, for murder, if the victim is not dead. Next machlokes, Rashi, Ramban. Rashi says that in order to absolve the criminal from murder, the victim has to get up on his own accord and walk around outside. Once he does that, and then he drops dead, the criminal is off the hook. He got up, he walked outside. I'm done with this guy. The story's over. He dropped dead now, that's a new episode. Ramban says in order for the criminal to be no longer liable for murder, he does not need to get up on his own accord and walk around outside. He needs to walk around outside, but he could still be a little bit sick. He could still be weak. He could still need the assistance of a cane and a walker.
That death could have still been related. I don't think
It could have. It could have. The Torah is telling me we assessed this criminal with a murderous action. The guy did not die. He's sick in bed. He gets up. Eventually, he walks around outside on his own strength. The criminal is off the hook. He's done. Ramban says that same thing. He walks around outside not on his own health. He still needs support. He still needs a cane. Then the criminal is off the hook. Question.
Saying, like, let's say, like, someone, like, fell down, and, someone, like, pushed them down, and, they're completely fine after it. They just need, like, have, like, a surgery to get,
So then there's damaging. It was not assessed to be a murderous action.
yeah, but then the person dies during surgery.
So again, if it was, I said earlier that if it was not assessed to be a murderous action, so then we don't connect the two. That would be similar to me banging the shtender, and then the shtender falls apart. It's not assessed to be a murderous action.
But the surgery was...
If I might do this to a newborn baby, it might be. But to do it to a sturdy person, that's not assessed to be a murderous action. Again, not assessed to be a murderous action. That's important, that initial assessment, and I think that's true in any civilized country, that they have a team of doctors and examiners that assess, what did you do? What did you do? So we have here these two different arguments, and I want to end with a thought over here, and this is what I've been working on for so many years. Parshas Mishpatim is not the only place in the Torah where we talk about murder. I brought down a pasuk in Vayikra. Somebody, Levi, read for me that last pasuk on the page. A person kills any living thing, he will surely die. Or any living person, he will die. A person kills ish, a person kills kol nefesh adam, any living adam, mois yumas, he will surely die. I want to end with this. What is the difference between the pasuk in Vayikra that we quoted on the end and the first pasuk that we have, pasuk in Shemais, pasuk Yud Beis? So somebody look at it closely and try to notice a difference over here.
One says the nefesh, one doesn't.
Okay, good. Well, what do you have? No, they're both talking about Yidden. Okay? Go ahead. Who?
They both say he does.
That's a good point. Vamace, the one in Shemais, seems to be talking about the death of the person. Over here, it doesn't say, it just says a man hits somebody else. That's getting closer to what I'm trying to drive at. As a matter of fact, it might be.
Oh, yeah, he's right. In this case,
Yeah.
it doesn't say if he dies or not. It just says if you hit a person, you die.
Well, I want to go like this. I think it's where Shia was going. Where's the word ish? The word ish, which means man. In the pasuk in Shemais, who is the word ish describing?
The person you hit.
The person that you hit, the criminal, or the victim? In the Shemais, the first pasuk.
Oh, the first pasuk is...
It's describing, the word ish is describing whom?
Ish is the victim, and the new one is the...
Yeah.
It means the...
Let's read it again.
Yeah, Make Ish.
Make ish, okay, fine, very good. You hit a man. You hit a man. So the word ish is referring to the victim, and whereas in Shemai, in Vayikra, the word ish is referring to the
criminal.
The criminal. I think that makes all the difference in the world. There's two different perspectives, and it's a general perspective. There's a lot of mitzvahs in Sefer Vayikra as well. This makes all the difference in the world. In Sefer Shemais, by murder, there's two issues. And by most things, there's two issues. There's the person that's done it, and then the damage that happened. What's the focus?
On the person he hurt and himself.
The person that's done it. We don't want murderers. It's a bad thing, excellent, to be a murderer. You're a murderer. We don't tolerate murderers in society. It's a bad thing. Regardless of what the result was, whether the guy dropped dead or he didn't drop dead, you might be able to earn the description of a murderer. And that, I would say, is Vayikra. Ish kiyake. The word ish is describing the murderer, the criminal. In Shemais, the word ish is describing the person that died. That's the other way of looking at a crime. What about the guy that died? What about the victim? Victim rights. We have to protect people. There's laws that we have in the Torah, and most every mitzvah and most every law that we have in the Torah has this duality to it. On one hand, they're there to protect people. We need things to run smoothly. And on one hand, they're there to perfect people, that we need to make sure you're not that guy. You're not that guy. Based on this, and I don't have time anymore, I went over time. Based on these two different ways of looking at mitzvahs, looking at it as the result, which we'll call the cheftza, the object, which is the dead body, or looking at it as the action, the gavra, the person that committed the crime, the criminal. Where's the focus in this mitzvah? Well, there's two focuses. There's a Sefer Shemais focus, which is we're worried about society, we're worried about people not being killed in the street. There's the Sefer Vayikra focus of murder, which is we cannot tolerate murderers. We don't want you to be a murderer. We don't want you to act like that. Based on these two different perspectives, I'd like everybody to spend a minute, instead of going to Musar, and to think of the machlekes we had between Rashi and Taisus and Sanhedrin, machlekes we have between Rashi and the Ramban that we have in the Parsha, and which perspective is Rashi coming from, and which perspective is Ramban and Taisus coming from. Are they focused on the victim, or are they focused on the horribleness of the criminal? Everybody think about it, fill it out.